Hello, everyone. I'm Ttcat. I'm your moderator of this panel. And it's a Sheba. We have Sheba Najmi from Kofo, Pakistan, and Khairil Yusof from Sinar, Malaysia, and also Arthit Suriyawongkul from the Thai Netizen network, Thailand, yeah. And also one panelist from Japan, Kofo, Japan. He's coming. He's Seki. And we will not wait for him. He will join us later. So today's panel is what we call struggling democracy. But mainly we are focused on the Asia context. So as everybody knows, in this region, we have a fragile young democracy for every country. We have a very different political context and the situation, and it's very complex and effect to each other's, right? So how TICTeC play the role in the democracy and in our country? So we invite different panelists. They all have a very different structure of their organization. And as you know, the TICTeC actually relate to, for instance, monitor the parliament or monitor the government to improve the transparency or to achieve the better general public participation, citizen participation or dialogue. So actually it's a very, relate very deeply with democracy, but it's different from traditional civil society organization because the core value of a TICTeC is a co-creation. Is we do something, we work with each other, and as an open source or open up ideas, we work together. So there's an argument about if you work with government in some perspective, in some sector, but in a different administration of the government, it still do something very bad or non-open at all. If it's you are doing the openwashing for your government, just play the beautiful or openness face for them. That's a very tough question to us in Taiwan. So that's why we raised this question too. And we want to learn from our panelists. So the first one, we will start from Khairil. And the first question I will going to ask from this panelist, everyone, is what's your context regarding democracy in your country? What's the challenge and the difficult to promote TICTeC in your country? And what's the most urgent issue TICTeC communities face? Please, Khairil.
Hello? All right. Okay, so in the context of Malaysia, as with quite a few other Southeast Asian countries, a lot of our countries, like in Malaysia, we have single-party rule. It might be a democratic country, but only one party ever wins, as you've seen in Cambodia as well. The result of that basically means that we have failed democratic systems. And the result of that, we'd have lack of civic education in our schools. Our public officials don't differentiate anymore between an elected official and the government. So the government is the same, and they don't teach things like rights or the Constitution in our education system. So we have a challenge of lack of civic awareness in the population in general. So yeah, when you start talking about TICTeC, they don't understand what the civic part means. So that's a big challenge. As a result of lack of democracy or democratic institutions, we also have system constraints on civil society in general, not just TICTeC. We thought we were a little bit smarter at Sinar, being that, okay, we're techs that we would be able to get out of this system. But we did find out from experience that we're just like other civil society organizations, and these constraints apply to you in TICTeC just as they do for the traditional human rights organizations. So all the constraints that I mentioned in one of my talks, like academic freedom, freedom of expression, freedom of association, freedom to start up nonprofits, all these constraints on civil society also constrain CivicTeC in Malaysia. We're just another civil society organization, just that we do a little bit more tech focus. So the challenges then is, how do we build this contributing community within these constraints in Southeast Asia? And we see that there's actually common problems about people trapped in institutions that are just 2 to 5 people. How do we break out of this? And some of the ideas, I think, that we might need to think of, we see a lot of collaboration happening at this conference, internationally. So I feel that sometimes we might need to think out of the box and the constraints of each individual countries. And I think one of the challenges and possible solutions is to actually start strengthening regional collaboration so that we break out of these constraints. Yeah.
It's wonderful. So, Arthit, what's the context in your country, the Thailand? We know there's a big change recently, right?
Yeah, there's always a big change. What the big change you're talking about? Okay. Like giving the context is like, in terms of democracy, where to start? I think one of the very problem at the moment is that like first is like we doesn't have any elected like government for already like 3 years, right? And it's still under the military rules, right? And the prime ministers, right? He has kind of power that can like issues like special law at his will, basically, right? Without the review of the parliament. So I think that's kind of like a short, like how to say, like 3 years context, right? But in that. This is not actually like happens like out of the vacuum, right? It's like if you look back like say like a decade, right? This is like the struggle actually going on, right? So basically it's like there's like 2 big movement or you can say the political fractions like going on in the country, right? So roughly speaking, like very like generalized, right? One part is we call it the fractions, like those yellow shirts people, right? Who like in 2005, right? Rally on the street and ask for accountability, right? And accusing that like the prime minister back then at the time, like Thaksin Shinawatra, that like he really corrupted, basically. Like so, like these yellow shirts people, they are people who like really care about like corruption issues, right? So like they ask for accountability. They say like there should be like check and balance and so and so, right? But then again, like because of that, like movement in 2005 and following in 2006, right? The military find a chance, like okay, it's probably this is a good chance for them, like to military to take over the power, right? So then we have the coup in 2006, right? And then there's a series of like political rallies on the street up until like still 2014. That it looks like the conflicts like cannot really like easily like deal with in the parliamentary system again, right? So there's another coup in 2014. So in the past, they say 10 years, we already have like 2 coups, right? And during the time, right, there's an anti-coup movement, right? Like they fashion themselves as like a democratic movement, right? These red shirt people, right? So in general, if you're talking like the major political movement in Thailand, there's like these 2 fractions, like the yellow one who really care about accountability, anti-corruption. And on another side, these like red shirt people who like their core value is the representation of people, right? Or the parliamentary system, things like that, right? And this is very interesting because we found that like these 2 major political fractions, they tend to hate each other, or not that hate, or like it's basically we can say like each other are uncomfortable, right, to work with another group. And this is actually our problem at the moment in terms of CivicTeC, right? Because say like we're talking about like we like to ask for the accountability from the parliament, right? So on the yellow shirt side, yeah, they really care about accountability. But then if they're going to work on this like parliamentary system together with richer people, they say, I don't like to work with richer people, right? And for the people who really care about parliamentary system, like representation, right, of the people, richer people, they will like say like, oh, those people, yellow shirt people, again, who work on this anti-corruption, and they all support material. I don't want to work with you. So I think like the problem with our movement at the moment is that, like on the technology part, I don't think it's a problem, but on the civic part, that's actually a large fraction in society. And when you're talking about this like check and balance, like civic tech, whatever, like open government, something like, I mean, if in the end you cannot actually have a people to work together, right? That's going to be our big challenge at the moment.
Yeah, but I know your government actually doing the open data, so many of advanced and co-work with our government. So why your government will embrace the open data movement at all?
It looks nice, basically. As long as you doesn't do anything with the data about the spending of the military, you are fine. Right, so there's actually a series of hackathons actually like got the support recently by this military government basically, right? But I mean, yeah, as long as you stay away, and this is actually a criticism from say like democratic like movement like red shirt side. When they look at these like hackathons, they will like basically look down sort of like of this event. Yeah, it's just like middle class people have like a programming skill, want to do some good thing, right? But they're not actually touching the core problem. This is criticism, right, from this side, right? So they tend to like, I don't want to join this event. So I think that's a problem of our like open government, open data hackathon so far. Those people who really like very critical, they feels like this kind of hackathon, it's like not really touching the real problem, and they don't want to join.
Okay, I see. Thank you. So, Sheba, what you can tell us in your countries, the context and the civic tech?
Sure. It's great to be on this panel because I feel like we're not the odd ones out, so that's good. So at this moment, Pakistan is at a very sort of critical juncture in its political history. Pakistan has been around for about 70 years, and in those 70 years we've had multiple rules of martial law. And next year, 2018, is actually going to be the first continuous decade of democratic governance in Pakistan. There have been about 15 prime ministers that have all been dismissed or ousted for some reason or the other. And the most recent ouster was just about 6 weeks ago, where the Pakistani Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif was dismissed on a corruption charge. He's actually been elected 3 times and never completed a single term, just like all the other prime ministers. The first time he was dismissed in '93 on a corruption charge. The second time it was a military coup, and then this time it was ostensibly a corruption charge by the Supreme Court. So I think his dismissal, what's interesting is that this time it's really being hailed by the people of Pakistan as the dawn of a new era, an era in which they will be free of corruption and government will be held accountable, and that there may be transparency in government's workings. And you can see that this public sentiment comes from a deep, widespread mistrust of government. Citizens tend to see government as corrupt and dishonest and ineffective and incapable of providing quality services. So in large part, that's because civilian government has never had the chance to mature in Pakistan, but also it's because corruption really is rampant. For instance, if you were the victim of any crime, the last thing you would want to do is go to the police. People are very wary of interacting with government officials. If you went to the police, there's a good chance that you might be implicated in the crime yourself in some way, or you might have to pay a bribe to get out. Pakistan loses $133 million daily to corruption. And less than 1% of the population actually pays taxes. And it's ranked, I think, 116th on the Corruption Perception Index out of 176. So what ends up happening is that because democratic governance is so weak in Pakistan, the military is a very, very strong institution. And the military steps in to fill in the gaps that are left by democratically elected government in civilian spheres, in foreign affairs, in politics. So for instance, the military, you'll see things like army public schools, civilian and military hospitals, and fertilizer companies that are all run by military institutions. At the same time, civil society and private institutions really step up as well. And take on the provision of public services. So for instance, the largest ambulance network in the country is run by a philanthropist. It's not a government service. What ends up happening is that citizens trust far more in both civil society and private institutions and in the military than they do in democratically elected government. And so one thing that TICTeC, I think, the nature of what we do holds a lot of promise for in this space is to rebuild trust by helping government provide services a lot better. And whether that's, digital education or women's empowerment or making transportation easy to access, any of that. The other, aside from sort of public services, the other piece where TICTeC can play a really big role is in showing what kind of democracy is possible. A democracy where there is transparency and there's accountability. For instance, at Code for Pakistan, we worked on an application in partnership with another civil society organization called the Media Matters for Democracy. And this is an application called Muhafiz that allows journalists, when they're traveling into dangerous areas, to place a security alert notification. And Media Matters for Democracy is the organization that represents journalists, and they said the journalists need this, so we worked with them and built this thing, and then later on realized that actually journalists are wary of using this or playing security alerts because they don't trust that the government officials will actually document those violations or will follow up and take any kind of action on this. So when it comes to that rebuilding of trust through accountability and transparency, that can be huge in changing, in sort of addressing corruption. And to give you an example, another application that we worked on in partnership with the Center for Governance and Public Accountability, it's called legis.pk, and it helps you track performance of legislators, parliamentarians in the Provincial Assembly. On the one hand, you would think that citizens aren't really interested in what the legislators in the Provincial Assembly, whether or not they're attending or voting. But I think what happens when you have transparency in different areas is that there's a ripple effect, and that starts sort of more and more institutions start becoming transparent. So in 2002, Pakistan became the first country in South Asia to pass a Freedom of Information ordinance. But this law was very weak on many fronts, and it had a long list of exemptions. And so in 2013, one of the provinces, the KP province, where we actually run our fellowship program, they passed an RTI, Right to Information Act, that was a very strong act, and the Punjab province followed. And these two acts are actually heralded as some of the best RTI laws in the world. The KP one was ranked as number 3 at some point. Having said that, the implementation of these in terms of government officials is not as great because there's no legal or disciplinary sort of culpability. Like there's no fear that they will actually be held accountable if they don't share the information. And in 2015, a funny thing, well, maybe it's not funny, but it was that the KP Assembly, essentially, the ones who passed this very strong RTI, 2 years later, they wanted to exempt their assembly, parliamentarians, from RTI, so that it would only apply to government officials and the parliament itself would be exempt from it. That didn't pass, but that's the kind of thing we're working with. And the federal RTI law is much weaker. It has a lot of exemptions. So I think some of the biggest challenges that civic tech faces in Pakistan are, obviously accountability and corruption and poor infrastructure and not having a strong democratic governance. But I think that there's some optimism that Pakistan has just joined OGP at the end of last year, and actually we're helping them. Asim, who's sitting right there, has been working with the federal government to draft the first National Action Plan, the digital commitments. So, we're cautiously optimistic that if those principles of participation and accountability and transparency are actually followed, then we'll hopefully see some progress.
Thank you, Sheba. And thank you all. And I heard something here that the first one is maybe people don't work with each other. And the second one is there's no trust with the people, with your government, or there's a lack of a basic freedom or democracy or the rights, basically, or we didn't touch the core problem to the general public or everything, right? So my following question is that what's your strategy to promote the civic tech and open government in your country regarding this young, fragile, or the circumstance? Don't worry. Yeah. Since you got here, we are now moving to the second question. The first question to Halu is a little bit, okay. Yeah. We are talking about the context of your country, the democracy context, and what's your biggest challenge that civic tech organization facing in those contexts, and also what do you think is your big issue, right?
Okay. First, I apologize. I completely forgot about the time difference between Japan and Taiwan. It's too close. Let me answer the question. Traditionally, the national character of Japanese citizens are not very individualistic so much. So many people who feel comfortable in the state, belonging to organizations, and have the characteristics to exert power when acting an organization. So often the Japanese are obedient to the authority and follow the rules strictly. And people depended on the government services, and gradually students became like a customer of services. And then government handled widely things by public services. As a result, the space for the civic participation has been decreasing, I think. The quality of public services in Japan is, I think, it's high quality. But the investment of the public service by government is a bit not so efficient right now. It costs very much. And the issues Japan is facing is the super aging society. Currently, elder people's rate means the percentage of the people who are older than 65 years old is the 25%, and by 2020, it will become 29%, and also at the end, 2030, it will exceed 33%. It's so one of 3 person is elder person in Japan. It's so difficult issues. We have to talk about that. So in that state, in that situation, the tax revenue will be decreasing, and also the security expenses will be expanding a lot. So Japanese government will no longer keep such kind of high quality services anymore. So we have to solve such kind of big issues in Japan. And civic tech in Japan will show a new way for students to solve such issues by themselves with cooperating with government. Also show a big potential to government to use technology efficiently well. Yeah, that situation in Japan.
Thank you so much. And our following question, maybe start with you, okay? The second question is, in many places, Asia, the democracy situation, we already understand a little bit right now. And what's your strategy to promote the civic tech and the open government in your country, and how you manage the relationship with your government? Thank you.
At Code for Pakistan, we have realized that what we try to do now is we try to bring people on board who either have contacts in government or with other organizations that have inroads in government or work with government, or that have the capability to develop those relationships. Pakistan is the sort of place where things get done if you have contacts and connections with government, right, specifically. So just to give you an example, even at a small level, the way Code for Pakistan became involved with writing the OGP commitments was that another civil society organization, Accountability Lab, they have a lot of regard for us as a technical partner, and so they approached us, and they were already involved with OGP, and they said, you guys should be a part of this, and brought us on board, and we became one of the 2 civil society organizations that wrote the digital commitments at the federal level. As another example, in the KP province, where we run our fellowship program, there, the way we were able to develop enough of a relationship with government to run our fellowship program was through the World Bank. The World Bank, obviously, any projects that are endorsed by the World Bank, the government tends to pay attention to. And so they were the ones who brought the government on board, and that's been really helpful to us to work with other organizations that already have inroads with government, so that then they will take us seriously. In terms of building relationships, we've also found that it's very important to involve government right from the outset in every aspect of it. So, for instance, in our fellowship program, we bring our government partners on board right from the outset through all the design sessions, the jam sessions that we might have, through doing, sharing the results of user research with them, and incorporating their feedback, getting feedback from them as well, and all of those pieces, sending them weekly updates, really making sure that they feel like they are bought into the process, and that has been useful for us. When it comes to, so in civic tech, you can take the role of a collaborator or an activist, and we tend to take the role of the collaborator. There are lots of organizations that are telling the government that they need to be doing better in Pakistan, and that's great, that's really important, but I think that it's also important to show the government how it can do better, and that's the role that we have been taking. It also helps us actually create services that reach end users, and that's really sort of powerful to be able to say, let's meet people's needs where they are. I think that there will be, over a long period of time, that the kind of collaboration will hopefully lead to a gradual cultural shift in government, and that feels more sustainable than sort of the activist role. So that's it.
I see your point and your strategy, but could you speak a little bit that, did you find that what you did actually improve the trust with the traditional civil society organization with the government?
So we've been working in Pakistan for 4 years, and before we got on the scene, there really wasn't, we hadn't seen any examples of collaboration between civil society and government in terms of getting citizens on board or civic participation. And so that has been interesting to see. Just in our fellowship program, the kind of shift we've seen is that in our first year, we had a few, maybe 300 people apply for the fellowship. Last year, we had over 1,000 people apply for these 20 fellowship positions. And so just that kind of interest among citizens and even participating with government, just at the citizen level, has been really, promising, encouraging for us to see. I think that civil society has been stepping up. In particular, we've seen a lot of civil society organizations being involved with OGP, with helping Pakistan write its first National Action Plan, and some departments in government taking that seriously. But this is not something that's going to change immediately or in the near term. I think it's going to take a lot of time. It's important to feel heartened by these little changes, and so, I think that it seems like things are moving in a positive direction, fingers crossed.
Thank you so much. So next to Khairil, yes, the same question. So how you manage your relationship with your government, and what kind of role you play, like a cooperator or an activist, or both?
Hello? Is it working? Yep. Okay. Actually, it's the same as in Pakistan. We play both roles. We wear both an activist hat and as well as a collaborator hat with the government. So as an activist, of course, we work on things like transparency, accountability, pushing for anti-corruption measures and so on. But at the same time, these things are needed, but in the long term, you need to change the institutions and the way governments work. And for that, we have to work with the government to change policy, to change systems. And we do this by doing research. By doing research and then trying to push Malaysia, generally countries like to measure themselves against each other. And also, generally governments themselves, even if they're authoritarian, want to do better in different, they want to do better economically, they want to show success. So how we work with government on this side usually is to work with international bodies, such as the World Bank, or international standards of measures, such as the Open Data Barometer. I'm confusing my rankings. And by working with international standards, working with international bodies like the World Bank, or even other international organizations, we found that this is a good way to engage with government on an equal level, rather than just as an activist. And for us here, our research from our work helps government understand better. And then by supporting these international organizations and research and rankings, it helps the government adopt better policies for transparency and accountability.
Thank you. How about you, Halu? Can you tell us about Japan?
We are also collaborative approach, and our strategy is creating a grassroots communities all over Japan, because in Japan there are 1,700 cities and towns, so we need to make grassroots communities. We have currently 77 local code for communities, and we have a official partnership with 40 brigade communities. And those communities are totally independent organization and try to solve issues in various ways. And the community style is similar to a kind of open source community, because I'm a developer and working with a lot of open source communities. So, and Code for Japan is connecting such people and groups as a network. And also we have an official channel with national government about open data and open governance. And some of the people, including me, are the member of the government committee also. And the Code for Japan has been running two projects, and one is Data Academy, and the second is Corporate Fellowship. Data Academy is a kind of training workshops and for the local government officials for improving their data management skills and usages. And also, Corporate Fellowship is the fellowship program, but a bit unique in Japan, because we ask company to send their employees to the local governments to work with the local government officials for solving local issues. We started this program because we need to involve the companies a lot in Japan, because Japanese people don't change their jobs often. So it's difficult to ask the people to, hey, we have a new job inside the local government, or you please quit your job and work just 1 year. After that, we don't care about that. We cannot say such thing is it's really difficult to hire the talented people. So we have to collaborate with the company, and so that's the and we don't charge the fee from the local government. Instead of that, we charge a fee from the corporate as a training program. Yeah.
Thank you. So Arthit, is Thailand joining the OGP yet? And what's following up about the OGP?
So the government actually has interest, and they already have discussed this in the, well, it's not actually a parliament at the moment. It's called National Legislative Assembly, right? And in the end, the cabinet approved, right, the the intent to apply to OGP, right? But it's, so this is like since 2015, right, to 3 years ago, right, that the cabinet said that, okay, we're going to apply for OGP. One of the obstacle, right, at the time is that, like, if you look at the criteria of OGP, one of them, like, it's going to relate it to, I don't remember, there's some like EU democracy index, whatever, right? So I mean, if your basically democracy level in your country, it's low, this score will be low as well, and that's going to affect the whole application possibility, right, process. So that's kind of a thing that, like, because like at the moment we doesn't really have like the democratically elected government, right? So that score is like kind of low. So that's kind of one of the things that prevent Thailand to be part of OGP. The government still have the intention to actually like go further, right? Like at least that's what they say. But I just like talk with Klai Kong from Social Technology Institute, right, or which is like one of the main person who run a lot of data open data hackathons, like since like I think Klai Kong, you involved in this like since 2010, right, with Open Dream, I think as well. Whatever, but I mean, just talk with him on this, and like. Klai Kong, right, earlier this year, right, 2007, right, 2017, also got appointed as a subcommittee, right, working with the government on this like OGP application. And this month is what, like September, right? There's only one meeting, like so far. And with that one meeting, so the contact point of the government, right, like who lead this process, it's called like, this is the first time I found this term in English, like Comptroller General's Department. Basically, it's the office like that like take care of like accountants and procurement businesses for the government, right? So in the end, this like CGD office, right, Comptroller General Department come up with a plan. So with only one meeting, right, they already have a plan. And they claim that this is actually from the participation from civil society as well. Like so Klai Kong represented civil society, something like that, right? So I think this is one of the issue we have at the moment. So I mean, on the paper it looks like there is a participation, but actually in the process, they just put like civil society name like there for a sake of like being comply to the criteria that's set by OGP. But yes, we have, I mean, at least the government has the intention to join, yes.
I see. So Taiwan has the intention to join the OGP too, but we couldn't. Not because of the score. Okay, so we are open the floor to the audience. There's one question. Is it any others? Two, and okay, we take this two first.
Hello? Do I need to stand or can I sit? Okay. All right. I'll sit, but I'm gonna be sharp. Or maybe not. So I want to challenge a few of the persons at the table. This may not be as acute for you, Hal, but one of the things, and I've been thinking about this topic of open washing, and to some extent had a conversation about it last week, and have a few friends, a good friend of mine wrote an article about it last year in relation to Romania. And I think one of the challenges that I haven't heard you guys speak to is that governments care about rankings, right? I mean, it's a reality. I've heard all of the persons at the table say that they really see themselves as trying to not have an adversarial relationship with government, trying to act as resources to help the agencies move forward. But isn't there a risk that, each of you come from there are some difficult governance challenges in the countries that you're working in, and that by helping to make the government agencies look better in executing these things, but not necessarily seeing where those things manifest in real change, contributing to ultimately the risk of why open washing. There are ways in which, just by publishing an action plan at OGP, a government can, increase in rankings in different ways, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they follow through with the execution of those things. And if you look on the success rate of most of OGP commitments, it's actually quite low. And so I guess part of the question to you guys is at what point, do you grapple with that challenge? And at what point do you say, well, I'm not going to engage, or I'm going to criticize, or do you just continue to be that supporting role?
Yes, thank you. I got your point. And this one?
It's very much related. Since collaboration is a common byword among the panelists, we're also trying that with Child Rights Coalition Asia, and because we would like for our advocacies to be inclusive, we would like to be everyone on board. But being a collaborator sometimes, keeps some of the organizations away from the advocacy because of the collaborative work with the government. So do you have, or have you developed some strategies that you can share so that we can accomplish inclusiveness without, having those setbacks in using the word collaboration or in using the strategy collaboration?
Thank you. This is a very important question. So, anyone want to take first?
Hello? Yep, I'll take that. I'm going to paraphrase Lupe Fiasco here. Basically, a jailed activist is highly ineffective. And what I mean by that is, at least in Malaysia, I play a very thin line. If I go too far on one side, I could be in jail for 6 months or a year, and so much for TICTeC. I can't code much in jail. At the same time, so we're playing a fine balance on that. Yeah, it's hard to say that. So I totally understand where you come from. Sometimes you go, it's like, why aren't you calling out X and X official, right? And I do, but to a certain limit, because once it gets to the risk where I actually go to jail, I have to now weigh my options and whether that's a smart thing or not. And then the other part for this kind of things is that TICTeC are not the only activists in this, so we all play our role. Some activists who are not TICTeC, their role can be more adversarial, leading protests and calling out government officials. But for TICTeC, we do work with them, and in that case, we support what we call, I think, Hatau mentioned, extreme side of TICTeC. And on that side, we help those activists with things like, security, encryption, and so on. But on the collaboration side, it's a fine line, and we try to be as effective as we can without being under the threat of going to jail. And as for open washing, And about rankings, again, this is a hard thing. I often quote a very cynical thing. So when the genocide happens, the UN sends a very, very angry letter, right? And this is a real concern. And this often happens when you deal with international organizations. They don't hit hard enough. For this, I think the Open Development Barometer is actually pretty good because it has a strong impact score on that. And I have had calls from Malaysian government officials trying to game the rankings. And when you have an impact component in those rankings, or you have the World Bank include things like whether civil society is actually included, whether civil society actually has any say in some of these things. I think these rankings are not as easy to game as the governments like to have them, would like them to do. And so the impact component of the Open Data Barometer, the inclusiveness, usage, and participation in civil society components in, let's, for example, the World Bank Open Data Assessment things, controls these things. So for as an example of where this works, because the World Bank actually included civil society participation in their readiness assessment, and that the governments have to prove demand and participation by civil society organizations, the Malaysian government had to talk to us. They wouldn't, the World Bank actually pressured the Malaysian government that you have to include civil society and have us at the table. I think in this case, at least for open data rankings at the World Bank level and Open Data Barometer, this impact requirement and this participation requirement keeps control of governments from, just open washing for not just the data part, but also the participation and impact of civil society.
Thank you. So Sheba?
So a lot of what Khairil said is also true for Pakistan. And I think we take it up a few notches in the sense that in Pakistan, there's no danger of the government looking good. Right now, the citizens, that is not a thing that we are worried about at this point. And so citizens the mistrust is so deep that civic engagement is particular, it's just limited to disillusionment and complaints and pessimism. So the fact that, we're getting some citizen technologists to come and work in government and 1,000 people applied, that's pretty rare and unique for Pakistan. So I think when we talk about the dangers of, and let me go to that for a second. When we're talking about the dangers of holding government accountable, the reason we're not doing that is okay, there's going to be too many negatives here, but the reason we're a collaborator and not an activist is because, like I said, there are lots of other organizations holding the government accountable. There's so much mistrust. The government is not looking good, right? And so we don't need to do that. But somebody needs to show them how they can do things better. And in the KP province in particular, there was a newly elected government in 2013. They had this mandate of transparency and citizen engagement and all these things. And they're very excited and wide-eyed, but they had no idea how to go about doing this. And so the World Bank brought us on board and said, can you show these guys, show what's possible? Somebody needs to fill that role, and so that's the role that we've taken on. And I think that if we're going to push things forward and actually help make change, we can take the role of being sort of letting government take credit for whatever it is doing, because it is, as long as there's desire to do something, for whatever the reasons that might be, the desire might be, as long as there's motion forward, then we have the opportunity to actually make things better and collaborate and show how to do it and get into that there and find those change agents that actually do want to make things happen and help them do it the right way. I can leave it at that.
And do you have any strategy to put other civil society organizations to work like you or work this way?
Yeah, I think the only way to move forward in a place like Pakistan is in collaboration. So, for instance, we have been, the only reason we've been able to do a lot of work in Pakistan is because other civil society organizations who are already established and who are already done more brought us along and said, we have a relationship with government, why don't you do this? I gave the example of how we got involved with writing the commitments for the Open Government Partnership. So we try to do the same, like where there is opportunity to make introductions or to bring other organizations on board that are doing good work and that is relevant, we absolutely try to bring them. Yeah.
Thank you. So, Arthit, a little bit?
Related, probably very difficult as well. Like our friends from Pakistan, talking about like how to actually put people believe in the political system, bring back the belief in the political system, right? But also at the same time, like if the ruling party at the moment, right, it's really corrupted, whatever, right? This ranking, right, as you say, like may put legitimacy, right, to the current corrupted ruling party. So I think that's kind of like a complicated and difficult thing as well to actually how to actually differentiate that. Like on one hand, you actually want to work towards building the trust for the government as a system, right? But not giving legitimacy too much for the government as the current group of people that run it at the moment, right? So I think that's difficult. But speaking as Thai Netizen Network, right, like the organization that I am working for, we actually did this to actually partly I can say manage our public image as well. Let me explain. Actually, to the eyes of the Thai people, Thai Netizen Networks are actually considered as a group of always criticizing government for whatever policy that they introduce, right? So for the most part, we are the group that criticizing and adversarial, to the government, right? And that sometimes doesn't really healthy for us. I mean, in a way that a lot of people, I mean, not the government, actually just general public, some of them feel oh, this group again, they never actually build anything, they only criticize, right? So partly this this area of work that we also put some efforts on, right? It's try to communicate with the public, hey, we actually can come up with some solution, right? To bring build some trust and something like that, and also use this actually an entry point as well to work in some areas with the government, so we can actually know some of the government officials that maybe they will work mainly in one department, right? But sometimes they may go into other committees, departments, and these people actually sometimes become our source of other bill and legislation that we have interest in our advocacy work. So basically, this work, it's kind of we try to find entry point to have some, say, backdoor in the government.
Okay.
Let's say, thanks.
Thanks. So do we have another round of question? There's 1, 2, and we are closing. So if you have a question, raise your hand right now. Okay, list 2.
Okay. Hello, and I think sometimes the key of the open washing is the politician. Sometimes the politician, they born and grow up without the internet, so they misunderstood the civil tech. They want to use the mechanism to convince the citizens not to hear their opinion, or they don't want to change their plan that the politician made. So do you meet the situation like that? And if you meet the situation like that, what is your strategy to change the situation? Thank you.
Thank you. It's a privilege to hear your experience in respective countries. I wonder that there are some peoples that actually come from the civil society that come into the government and become your intermediary that articulate your agenda, or from the government that actually go into the civil society that also can become, a source of better communications or even a better policy advocate for you. So I think we've been struggling a lot with the fighting, yeah, from both sides, and the intermediary group maybe sometimes work, but it depends on the country. So I need a little bit more information about that and your strategy on that.
Okay, thank you. So maybe start from Halu.
So I would ask your question about the government to the citizen community, and a lot of local government officials are coming to our code for brigades meetings as not officials, just in person, and we held a lot of workshops with local government, and currently as a country we are trying to start the collaborative project with Kobe City. It's a local government in Japan, yeah, Kobe City, and startups, civic startups. We are trying to start the project which we create a team with local government officials and startups, and the local government shows issues which they want to solve, their local issues, and try and submit the startups to the Kobe City to, oh, we can do this kind of things with you, and we create a team with the local government and startups and try to make prototypes with citizen-driven, meaning human-centered driven idea, and try and after do the demo day. And in the demo day, the startups will show some prototypes and explain and used by the government if the prototype is good. So yeah, this kind of collaborative project is going on.
Thank you, Khairil.
Okay, on the inclusiveness part, I'm going to cover that later, I think, because it's on my last question. It's something close to my heart. On the politician doesn't understand civic tech, and also this are people who are civil society and government and so on. This might not apply to Japan because you have an aging society, but in Southeast Asia, we have a very young society, right? So for me, I think kind of long-term strategy, right? These older people are going to go away, and sorry. Take that as how you want to take it. Okay, they're going to retire eventually, okay? That still doesn't sound good either. Okay, so anyways, in places like let's say Southeast Asia, or maybe even Taiwan, I'm not familiar with the demographics here, you have a growing and big base of young people who are online, who are activated. So for me, when I think about it long-term strategically, it's going to be very hard to change the opinions of 60-year-olds or 50-year-olds. Millennials are already angry with me because I don't get them, right? And I'm just a few years older than them. I hope. For me here, in terms of getting inclusiveness of government, I think it's to think about strategically. So one of the things that I've done is to start looking at the youth groups to see what their issues are, to start educating them because they're going to be involved. They're going to be demanding, town halls on Facebook groups, for example, or online, or even Snapchat. I think that's what millennials use these days. So for me, I think strategically work with youth groups, especially the activated politically youth groups, whether it's civil society. These people are going to be the next generation of leaders. They're going to be the next generation of civil society leaders. So I think working with these groups strategically is a good thing to do. You work with your, so we don't do this specifically at Sinar, but other NGOs do that, who teach civic rights, to teach about these young people, like what they should be doing. And we work with them too. So to also teach these other groups, like how can they use platforms better? How can youth do platforms better? And if we do this strategically and get youth activated on their voting rights, they're going to be voting the people that are going to be basically understanding the issues that the younger generation is going to have. So I would say start working with youth now, and the change will happen, let's say, 5 years from now.
Thank you. So the last one goes Sheba, about the politician don't understand the open data.
Sure. I think TICTeC, so just a little quick background of my own, which is that I was a Code for America fellow in 2012, and that was really my first foray into TICTeC. And this whole space was very, very new to me. So I learned all this vocabulary from Code for America, and I had all these, this way of thinking that Code for America has, and I hadn't lived in Pakistan for a few years at this point. I went back to Pakistan in 2013, and I went to talk to government. And this was a big learning for me, because I went and I talked to government, and I was saying all these things, and they basically laughed at me. And they said, you're saying all this stuff, we don't understand it. And it was my fault, in large part, because I was using the jargon that I'd learned at Code for America, and I was using vocabulary in English, because I don't even know the Urdu words for open data and, all this kind of stuff. And so that was a big learning for me, and I was also just showing up by myself, like without any connection, just going into a government office and just getting a meeting and just talk, and here's this woman coming from the outside and saying these things, and it just didn't make any sense to them. And so that was, over the last 4.5 years, we've learned a lot more about the context, and what's been really interesting is that, for instance, when we started partnering with a different province's government than the one that was laughing at me, the KP province, when I was first talking to them, their interest was in, their mandate was sort of doing startups and supporting entrepreneurship. And I was explaining to them that public services are important, and why public services are important, which is, you would imagine that that's the #1 priority. That's what a government is supposed to do, is deliver services to people. But what was interesting and what was attractive was entrepreneurship and startup, and that was the buzzwordy stuff, and that was the sexy thing that the government was interested in. And I was, so we invited them to some of our events, and what we did was, from that hackathon, we convinced them sort of, we'll do the hackathon, but then why don't we do a fellowship program and get these people on for a longer period of time, and that sort of thing. So with the OGP commitments, Asim, who's there, was able to get sign-off from the federal government on a digital services unit and on a federal fellowship, and that's now written up in the OGP commitments that are under review. So I think part of it is just, making, helping government do what it wants to do, as long as it's not, at odds with what we want to do, but at the same time sort of pushing them towards this thing and sticking with our messaging, and then finding that one change agent who really gets it, and helping them do that.
Thank you. So the last, start from Halu. Could you give us one sentence about what's your goal, what you see, maybe in 5 years, CivicTeC community to do in your country with democracy and so on?
One sentence?
Yeah.
Fix public procurement. Yeah.
Yes. Okay, Khairil, what's your goal?
Okay, so for me, I wanted to kind of answer some of the things on inclusiveness. So I'm trying to try to combine all of these things into one sentence.
Brief?
Yes.
Can you be brief?
I'll
Thank
use
you.
it into one sentence with a lot of ands, like your primary students. Okay, so basically, my kind of pseudo one-sentence answer to this for CivicTeC is start from the bottom, not from the top. And so this would cover things like inclusiveness. So, so when we try to solve issues, start from the bottom. Okay, let's just say child rights, for example, right? So let's go from child rights. Okay, what are the issues of child rights? Then you work yourself up. What government, what authority or people in power or data that you need for the child right? Then go up the next step. Who's the representatives that you can affect for policy for that? And then see what civic tools can affect that. And then go all the way up some more. What's it at the national budget? How is it being allocated and so on? Is enough being allocated? So my thing for this is that for inclusiveness and the way to work for civic tech is to work from ground up. And there's no right or wrong in which level that you work it, but just start from the bottom and work your way up.
Thank you. Arthit?
I think key, right, for me is like I'm really agree with Khairil. I think for me, right, the key of civic tech it's participation, right? And we heard a lot of public services participation, right, during our talks, right? And I think there's like two related terms, but different, right? It's one is like civic tech, another one is gov tech. Right? And to me, right, it's very related, and these two community can work like together, right? There's a lot of common thing or overlapping, but I think the difference is the focus. So when you're talking about like public services, right, providing better public services, I think if you put focus on that, it's more like towards the gov tech side, right? But for me, like if your focus is more on like participation, yes, that's the civic tech thing. In the end, you're going to have a better public service, yes, right? But I think like that's how you're going like approach, right? Let's say, right, if like your goal it's civic participation, right? And if you really walk towards that goal, right, the civic participation, the better public service can be your byproduct, right? But if your goal, right, it's better public service. Yeah, civic participation can be one of the means, right, to go towards that. But I think, so like, try to answer your question, like, what is like civic tech for me? I will put more focus on participation. Thanks.
Sheba?
So, Julia and I talked about this at TICTeC in Florence briefly, which is that I think civic tech, for me, what I can really see is now at Code for Pakistan, we have a team of 30 people in Pakistan, core team that's working on a lot of these things. And what is remarkable to see is the lives of those people that have been changed and how they've become really involved civically and are becoming leaders and pushing their, and it's kind of like a ripple effect. This is sort of expanding from there. And you know, I think those are the sorts of things, in addition to all the fellows and the outcomes of actual change in government culture and in public services, well, is a big uphill battle. That'll take a long time. But I think that what we can do is look at the people themselves that are actually engaged in this and see how they're affecting their communities and you know, how that's expanding. And just sort of keep on keeping on. Like anything worth doing was never easy.
Thank you so much. So one strategy from GovZero here, because we are decentralized communities, so some people criticize the government, some people work with them. So we just say nobody can represent GovZero, so that's it. And I want to thank, yeah. I want to thank all the audience because your question, what question you raised, actually is the question we are trying to discuss in this panel at the very first place what we try to discuss. So we go through like a government side, civil society, civic tech, community, the relationship, and also inclusive and the politician and every predicts. Every sector. So I think it's fantastic to have you all. And the last thing I want to ask is, who are satisfied with your own country's democracy and the system? Please raise your hand. So we are not alone. Thank you so much. And thanks panelists. Thank you.